A game, and I'm sure the subject of investigations and analyses much more extensive than the one I will offer you right now. But let me try to hit on the major twists and turns. The first twist came on the very first move. E4 was expected by Nomaraja Gukesh, who has the white pieces in his first World Championship match. And Ding responds with the French eschewing his favorite E5. He does move the E-pawn. He only moves it one square. And we enter a topical line, knight c3. Of course, the most popular and most principled move. They enter the Steinitz variation. And the second surprise, move 6, knight c to e2, dropping the knight back. A line second in popularity by a country mile to the main line, which is knight f3. And this turned out to be a very successful surprise, as a couple of moves later, on move 7, Ding took over 20 minutes deciding on a course of action. Black has a lot of options, but Ding ultimately decided on a campaign of queenside expansion. A very rare move. Comparatively speaking, queen b6 was far more common. He pushed the pawn up to e4, Gukesh developing the rest of his queenside, Ding taking care of his kingside development, and g4 was blitzed out by Gukesh, a very deep move with a prophylactic idea. He intended to meet castles with g5 in order to discourage this important idea of f6. But Ding reacted well. Queen to a5, creating the possibility of cd. A lot of complex strategic moments, but when the smoke cleared a couple of moves later, b4 was found by Gukesh a very important intermediate move, sending the queen back, and now he was able to recapture with the convenient knight, asserting his space advantage. And a couple of moves later, the critical moment, really potentially the most important turning moment of the game. At this point, Gukesh had 80 minutes, 50-minute time advantage over Ding, who had 36 minutes for over 20 moves. A space advantage, the possibility of executing f5. But Gukesh took 30 minutes. Quite possibly, he was calculating more concrete options like f5. There was the option of knight d2, trading off Black's knight. Ultimately, he settled on a pretty natural move, queen e2, centralizing his queen. And if Ding would have castled kingside, we might have been writing a very different narrative. Gukesh would have likely brought his rook into the center, and now everything would have been ready for the f5 pawn push. But instead, Ding, he sensed the moment, and he rattles off a sequence of moves that will really capture the hearts and minds of chess fans. One of the most incredible sequences probably of his match career. He trades on d4 and then sticks his knight on a second outpost on b2. Yeah, that square exists, opening up a line of fire on the c3 pawn. Once Gukesh defends that pawn, an inaccurate move, that opens a can of worms. Rook c8, hitting the pawn again. Gukesh defends it with rook ac1. And after queen c4, it becomes clear that suddenly Ding's queen and knight are able to zigzag, to knife their way among the light square weaknesses. And suddenly Gukesh, his knight on d4, his queen side becomes less impressive. He tries to push f5, but queen d3 is another brilliant salvo by Ding, trying to trade queens and take the sting out of White's attack. Queen f4 would have been met with g5, and as Judith pointed out, f takes g6, queen takes g6 would have been a disaster for White. Too many threats. So Gukesh went the other way, but that still allowed the bishop to activate to g5. White trying to perform some acrobatics just to keep his pieces alive. Another incredible move, blitzed out by Ding, threatening rook takes d4. Gukesh, he finds an incredible defensive resource in turn. A great game takes two authors, and Gukesh, by pushing h4 and giving up the c3 pawn strategically, and then opening up the f-file, Ding recaptures with a pawn. That's a mistake. He could have kept a decisive advantage with bishop takes e6. Suddenly, White drops the knight back to e2 for the second time in the game. The first time was on move 6, right? That surprising line. This time, he eliminates the very important dark squared bishop. And this was the final turning point. Had Gukesh started with bishop c5, this would have kept Black's king stuck in the center. Now, there was the incredible line where queen takes h7 seems to win the game, but runs into the counterblow queen d4 check, deflecting the bishop and leading to a winning endgame. But instead, there's no need for queen takes h7, and the subtle queen c2, or the engine move rook f3 hitting a3, would have set White up with very serious counterplay. And in time pressure, nobody knows what would have happened. But instead, it's the wrong move order by Gukesh. He starts with queen c2, giving Ding a chance to get his queen out of the line of fire and earning a tempo to castle kingside and get the king to relative safety. Ding follows up with a sequence of amazingly precise moves, starting with knight d3, and ending with the final blow e5, forcing further simplifications. And now his 2 extra pawns and his dominant minor pieces quickly lead to a confident victory. He grabs a 3rd extra pawn, and in this position, on account of the intermezzo queen e4, queen f2 check, Gukesh extended his hand in resignation. Game 1 goes to the reigning world champion, Ding Liren. An incredible fight, a great defensive effort by Gukesh, but it ultimately was not enough. Ding Liren makes a serious statement, winning his first game in over 300 days. And at what an opportune moment, John Sargent.
It absolutely is. Thank you so much for that, Danya. A wild